Hello, my name is Layton. I'm an intuitive and a mystic, and something that I wanted to talk about today is something that I greatly would have benefited from many years ago. I feel like I had to go through so much struggle, especially around clairsentience. And I see so many people asking questions about, how do I slow down my psychic experiences, or how can I manage it? How can I make it so that it's less overwhelming, less stressful? And especially if you're empathic or clairsentient, there are so many people that genuinely don't know that you can separate from what someone else is feeling or experiencing. They don't know that you don't have to take that on. And the amount that we take on is not linked to how psychic we are. The amount that we take on is actually a representation of how embodied or disembodied we are, how grounded or dissociated we are. And so it's not, a measure of psychic ability to say like, oh, like I feel so much all the time, or I'm constantly getting all of this information. And I say that to say that it's okay to choose not to take certain things on. It's okay to choose and say, this is too much for me. This isn't really for me. I'm not really getting anything from this. I don't need to take this on, and to set that boundary. And you may have seen things online, like, oh, just say that the boundary's there and it's there, or visualize a bubble around you or something. And, that can work if you are already in a state within your nervous system where you are so embodied and you have built up enough energy and really raised like the quality of your nervous system into kind of like this higher state where you're not going to be as susceptible to that stuff. But realistically, in the society that we're in, most of us aren't working from that state. Most of us have to start where, we really feel bombarded by everything around us, and it can be really overwhelming. I talk a lot about nervous system regulation, and my channel is called Psychic Somatics for a reason. It's because our somatic processing, the way that we feel things in the body, is directly related to our psychic awareness. Our bodies are inherently psychic. They are actually so psychic you wouldn't even believe it. We have our five senses, obviously, and then we have so many psychic senses that are kind of coming from these higher organs that are accessible to absolutely anyone, as accessible as your sense of smell, or your ability to see, or your ability to hear. And all it really takes is us developing that. But sometimes we are open in places that we aren't necessarily ready to be open yet, especially if you've done a lot of psychedelics or drugs in the past, or if you've ever had an injury to the head or the spine, anything that's going to really impact the central nervous system, or if you've experienced a lot of trauma. What can happen is that we become extremely psychically open before we have the ability to really integrate what we're experiencing. And in order to integrate what we are experiencing, we have to be in the body. We can't be dissociated and like in the upper chakras, just kind of like, with no grounding all over the place all the time. I lived that way for so many years, and it was honestly really, really hard. It's really, really hard when you are seeing so many things that are unsettling to you, or that cause you to feel afraid, and you feel like you're experiencing constant psychic attack, and you're trying to navigate relationships or being out in public, but you might be hearing people's thoughts, or you might be feeling all of this energy coming from them. You may be able to pick up on memories of theirs or trauma that they've experienced. You may be picking up on the fact that they are currently addicted to a substance. I mean, really, there are so many things that you can pick up psychically And I think especially if you are a very clairsentient and you are just taking on all of that in the body, it can cause sickness, it can cause disease. You can experience these symptoms that you think are mental illness because you don't, know any better. So, in order to develop these boundaries, our psychic boundaries that we place are only going to work in accordance with how embodied we are, with how regulated we are. And I really want to drive that home because I think that, that's something that I say a lot as I talk about that we need to be embodied. I talk about that we need to be regulated. But if you're anything like how I used to be, you might be like, well, what does that mean? Like, how do I apply that in my real life? I'll never forget the first time I had someone say to me, I really think you need to look into nervous system regulation. And I think a lot of the things that you're experiencing are proof that your nervous system is extremely dysregulated. You're very disembodied. And I'm thinking like, well, duh, I'm disembodied. I'm I'm dissociated all the time, and I don't know how to be in my body. And the idea that there were just exercises or things that I could do to come into my body was so foreign to me. It didn't even seem possible, to be honest. It didn't even seem like something that was even remotely accessible to me because that is how disconnected I was from my body. So I have been there. I know what it's like to be like, what does that even mean? Is it possible for me? Can I do it? And I also want to say that sometimes we may feel like something isn't possible for us because we've tried certain avenues, and maybe you did breath work or meditation or yoga, and it's like, well, I still don't feel it in my body, and so it just doesn't work for me. And we really we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater like that, because every single person is so unique and there's so much that goes into it. Diet can play a really big role. Something like our environment, your home environment, your work environment. If you are in an environment where your body doesn't feel safe and you never get a break from that, then it's really hard to heal. It's really hard to come back into the body because you have to convince the body that it's safe. If the body is not convinced that it's safe, then, there's really only so much that we can do from there. Also, things like if you are not sober or if you're using a lot of substances, that is really going to impact it. If you're consuming a lot of caffeine, or if you are engaged in spiritual practices that are not good hygiene, or they're constantly pulling you up out of the body. This was something that I did for a long time too. I was dissociated all the time, and then my spiritual practice was like, oh, I'm just going to channel all the time, and I'm going to do mediumship, and everything was bringing me up out of my body into the upper chakra system in a way that I was never coming back down. So yeah, that being said, a lot of people don't know what it actually looks like to be embodied. So something that I think, for me at least, is one of the biggest changes that I've had is, before when I was chronically dissociated, what I was experiencing was this big disconnect between me, my true core self, what I wanted, my trauma self, and all of these things. It was like I could not be consistent to save my life. I would make a decision about something, and then suddenly it would seem like I was like, who even made that decision? Like I would totally change my mind about it, and it just I could not be consistent because I didn't know myself. I didn't know what I wanted, and realistically we can't if we're not in our body. So one of the things that really surprised me about myself, because I had always viewed myself as being someone that was very wishy-washy, that was very inconsistent. I thought that I could never make my mind up, or I thought that I didn't know what I wanted. Because of that, I had a really hard time kind of like picking a career path. I had a hard time, deciding what to do with different relationships in my life. And it just felt like I couldn't stand by my word. It felt like I couldn't, say something and actually trust myself that I was making the right decision. And now, as someone who is very embodied, um, not necessarily perfectly embodied, but very embodied, I have found that I can set a long-term goal and, nothing's going to get in the way of that. I'm very set. I'm like, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. And I'll take the steps to get there. I find that my feelings are consistent with my thoughts, and my thoughts are consistent with my actions. And it's like there's no longer this ambiguity in my life. There's no longer this confusion. So when we come into the body, one of the first things that we'll notice, at least that's how it was for me, is that we are not as confused as we thought we were. We're not as disconnected from ourselves as we thought we were. So when we come into the body, not only do we begin to learn more about ourselves, but that's really when we're able to get very clear psychic information, because we no longer have that disconnect. We're not kind of spread out into multiple different areas. That's the thing. It's like, if we are not embodied, it's going to be really difficult to connect to one stream and kind of stay there. And thus, when we go into these psychic states, we aren't even gonna know what we're connecting to. It will be a lot easier if we're very disembodied and dissociated to connect to lower realms. And because we don't have any idea what our own energy is like, because we've never been actually embodied, we're not going to know how to measure outside energy, because realistically, the only way that we can measure it is in relationship to our own energy. It's like a mirror, you know what I mean? So having every aspect of the self aligned as a psychic is incredibly important. It's something that is going to give us so much context when reading energy in other people. We're less likely to project. We're less likely to read something the wrong way. And reading energy can be really complex, because if you are reading energy coming off of a specific person, for example, there are so many things that can be coming off of someone who is a drug addict or highly traumatized, or, has been sexually abused or something. And if we are not grounded enough to read it properly, then we might just write it off as like, oh, that's bad energy. I don't like their energy. They have these things in their field, and I don't like that. And when we write off someone in that state, that is so sad, because we actually, as psychics, the reason why we even have this ability is to serve other people and to help other people and to hold space for other people, a healing space, a space where they're safe to recover. And in order to recover, they have to have the ability to show up as completely themselves, trauma and all. And we need to have the ability to read that without confusion, without projection, without, just seeing it all through this distorted lens. So another sign of being very embodied as a psychic is that we begin to choose reality over fantasy. We no longer need to feed into these false ideas of ourselves, these false ideas of life, of the cosmos, because reality is something that we feel safe enough to choose. We feel secure enough to choose. So an example would be, the whole starseed movement, and feeling like I am not human. I'm actually a Pleiadian or an Arcturian, and I'm not from here, so I don't have to take responsibility for any of this stuff, because that's you guys, that's not me. And because of that, we end up bypassing our trauma, we bypass our history, we bypass, unfortunately, our future and what we could be, because we don't want to deal with it. We're choosing this fantasy. We're choosing this false idea of how things are. And it's the same if in our own personal lives we were to say, instead of choosing actual psychic development, actual spiritual development, the building of, character and integrity, I don't want to put the work in. So I am just going to take mushrooms every single time I feel like I have a problem in my life, and then that will solve it. Psychedelics, I mean, there is a place for them, and they can be helpful, but at the same time, if we aren't careful, what we end up doing is really feeding into the Luciferian impulse to escape and to just kind of rise above all of it. And that's not what we're intended to do. We are intended to refine the ego. We are intended to work on it and work with it, not shut it down, because realistically, we can't actually do that. We can tell ourselves that that's what we're doing. We can convince ourselves and gaslight ourselves into thinking that we have somehow overcome the ego, that we have somehow overcome humanity, our humanity. But realistically, that is not backed in spiritual science. It's not real, So everybody has, this Luciferic impulse within them. What matters is whether or not it's balanced. So we need to have a very, it's a very fine line, and we need to know where we fall there. I know that I'm very prone to fantasy, very prone to daydreaming. So all of that stuff, I was like, yeah, like the psychedelics and the starseed stuff. And I was not intentionally bypassing. And by that, I mean, I wasn't doing it consciously. I wasn't like, yeah, no one needs the inner work. Like, I thought that was the inner work because that's how dissociated I was. That's how detached I was. And coming into the body, once you are in the body, once you feel safe enough to be in the body, and you start to be able to show up differently in your day-to-day life, you start to be able to face reality. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this isn't something that I have to escape from. This isn't something that I have to protect myself from. I'm safe in my body now. I can show up and I can come together with humanity, and we can do this together. So that's something that I feel like is very beneficial, and when we are able to come into that state, that is when we're able to really come together as a community, because all of this escapism that we're doing, we are so disconnected, not only from our own selves but from each other. It's like, I don't need you, and I don't need this because I don't need anything on earth, and I don't even want to be human, and it's actually really sad. Other things, so choosing genuine self-care over temporary pleasure is another sign of being embodied, and this is extremely important. It lines up perfectly with the last point that I was making, because genuine self-care is living in reality. It's taking care of ourselves, not just appeasing and nurturing our emotions in the moment. It is important to do that, but we have to do that in a healthy way, a way that is going to support us in the long term. So again, if we are feeling, upset about something, and we're working through something, and it's like, well, if I just take these mushrooms, or if I just do this LSD, and I go to this Vipassana retreat or something. I love Vipassana, so I'm not, that is not a blow to it by any means, but we have to make sure that we're not using this stuff to fill a void and to escape the actual problem. We have to make sure that we are addressing the root, because that is self-care. That is genuine self-care. We can't just pretend that our problems aren't there. So I know for me, I'm a Taurus moon. I love a nice little treat. And I can't even tell you how many times in the past I would be having a bad day or something, and it's like, well, I'm just going to go get myself, a nice little treat, and that's going to make me feel better. And some people can do that and do it in moderation. I can certainly do it in moderation now, but in the past, I really felt like I couldn't. So it would turn into this thing of materialism, or trying to have my long-term, very deep needs met through food or things I could buy for myself, or these experiences that were going to make me feel like life wasn't so hard, you know? And it is very important for us to give ourselves beautiful experiences, and to eat food that we love, and to buy ourselves things that are going to add joy to our lives. But we need to make sure that we aren't doing that to fill a void that is far deeper than the things that we're trying to pour into it, you know? So I'm always going to be using myself as examples for things like this, because I've been there and I did all of this stuff. But instead, you know, if I was constantly buying myself like a nice little treat, and every time something went wrong and things start going wrong a lot, and then, you know, before you know it, you're eating things that are really bad for you, and you're doing it all the time, and the excuse is like, well, it's making me feel better in the moment, you know? And I'm buying myself stuff all the time, racking up, you know, credit card debt, or putting all these charges on my card, or whatever it may be, trying to meet a need for the moment. We always need to look past the moment. We need to have the ability to see the entire picture. And however we are with ourselves as psychics, this is how we're going to work. So if we're working with someone else, if we're reading energy, do we have the capacity to see the large picture? Are we giving them temporary solutions, or trying to meet their needs in very materialistic or shallow ways, when what they actually need is a long-term solution? What they actually need is clarity. What they actually need is someone to see into their blind spots, and we need to be honest about that. So if we can't do that with our own selves, if we can't be truthful with ourselves, if we can't see into our own blind spots, as psychics, we can't do that with other people. So this is another reason why embodiment as a psychic is so important. I mean, I firmly believe that we shouldn't even be working as psychics if we are disembodied, if we're not regulated, because we won't be clear. And I say that as someone who used to work from that state. It doesn't mean that everything that I said, or, you know, all of the work that I was doing before was wrong. Of course, things still come through. If spirit wants something to come through for someone, it's going to come through, you know. But do we want to take that risk, or do we want to know that we have integrity? Do we want to know that we are embodied, that we're regulated, and that we can genuinely offer this information to ourselves and to individual people, or to humanity, because we know that it's clear and we know that it's coming from Christ, you know? So the last point that I'm going to make about this, there's really so much that I could say about embodiment, but for the sake of time, we know that we're embodied by our ability to handle stress, our ability to handle real life situations. So as someone who has spent so much of my life being very dysregulated, it really did not take much to stress me out. Today, I got in an Uber. Before I got in the Uber, because where I live, it's kind of a complicated area, and you know, I'm trying to explain where I live, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be late and everything, and I felt completely calm. I was fine. I wasn't worried about it. You know, not only did I feel calm and regulated and embodied, but I felt safe. I felt content. I felt joyful. And when my Uber driver finally picked me up, I got in the car, you know, we were talking the whole time, and it was really, really nice. This is something that's probably not how it would have gone in the past. In the past, if I was extremely dysregulated, that whole scenario of not being able to find where I live and not knowing if I was going to be late or not would have completely stressed me out. I would have felt so, you know, manic and wound up. I would have been very anxious. I probably wouldn't have been talking to my driver. I would have gotten to my appointment and then, you know, apologizing profusely the whole time, and all in my head about the fact that I was late. And then I would have been anxious about calling my Uber on the way back. And, you know, we learn when we are safe in the body, when we have established safety within the body, we learn how to build up healthy stress. And our nervous system, every little intricate part of our nervous system, every single, literally, our entire nervous system is receiving messages psychically. It is intricately connected to the cosmos, directly connected to the cosmos. It's alive. It's alive and it's constantly receiving information. And if you are a highly psychic person, then you are going to be extremely sensitive to the fact that it's constantly picking up information. That's just normal. But then what ends up happening is that when we are so dysregulated, when we are not in our body, when we haven't established that safety yet, it is very frustrating because it's almost like nothing can happen without it overstimulating us. We have constant sensory overload. We're stressed all the time. We're not sleeping. We can't shut our mind off. It's just going, going, and going. So when we are able to come into the body, when we are able to establish that safety, that is when we're able to move from that state. And I am going to start, because right now I'm really trying to lay a foundation for all of this stuff and what it means so that I can start putting out tons and tons of different exercises. I mean, I could come up with exercises for days, exercises for if you're claircognizant, if you're clairaudient, if you're clairsentient, if you're just stressed, if you have a lot of trauma, if you're recovering from a dissociative disorder, if you're recovering from OCD or ADHD. I mean, I have exercises for, I would say days, but really probably for months and years, because I've done all this stuff in myself and with the people that I work with, and seen a lot of success with it personally and again, with the people that I work with. So I'm really excited to go in depth and give you tools so that you can apply this stuff to your own life and you can feel safe in your body, because so many of us genuinely feel like that's not possible for us. I mean, I was in therapy for so long and I never was in my body. Even when I thought I was in my body, it wasn't until I began a practice of daily somatic work. And I mean, there was a lot that went into that for me. I had to get completely sober. I had to change my diet. I had to change my environment and set all of these boundaries with myself, but also with people in my life and with the things I was willing to do and the things I wasn't willing to do. Psychically, I had to completely shut down certain practices until I was able to be in my body. I had to start doing yoga every day and prioritizing things that were going to have me rooted and grounded, because that's not something that I had ever experienced before. So we are going to get there. I don't want you to watch this and feel like, well, wait, now I don't know what to do. But realistically, there are so many different things to do. Regulation and embodiment, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's going to be something where you are going to have to look at your own life. You are going to have to try different things. And if something doesn't work for you, that is okay. When we put this pressure on ourselves of, that didn't work for me, so now nothing is going to work, we are kind of fulfilling that pattern. We are telling ourselves, this isn't going to work. This is impossible. It's going to work for everybody else but me. And then we're making sure that that's true by stopping after the first thing that doesn't work. So I am going to make sure that I have more than enough material out there so that you will find something that is for you. But I really just today wanted to talk about the importance of being embodied in our psychic work, because unfortunately there are so many practicing psychics that are very disembodied. Like I said, I was one of them before, and there's just so much danger to that. And I feel like I have spoken a lot in the past about all of the dangers that can come from that, how we can project and how we can be, we're a lot more prone to psychic attack because we're not in our body and we can't adequately set these boundaries with what we are taking on from other people or what is interacting with us, because we aren't embodied enough to do so. So I've spoken a lot about that, but I really did not feel like I had spoken enough yet about what it actually looks like to be embodied. You know, what does it look like? How can I expect that to manifest? If I am embodied, what can I expect to see as the fruits of my life? So I really hope that this gave some context for that and offered some clarity. If there's anything that you feel like you want me to cover or anything that you want or need more context for, please feel free to let me know. I love getting questions. I love researching this stuff, and I honestly have a lot of fun with it. Anything in the psychic somatic arena is just right up my alley. So, yeah, thank you so much for watching and for being here with me. I really appreciate it.